The United States of America locks up more people than any other nation in the world. And very often, it locks up the wrong person, by design, because our prison system is a tool for oppression. And today, we are going to be interviewing somebody who the system not only failed, but tried to silence. Her name is Shonique Williams, and she was wrongfully convicted. But now, she's rightfully running for Congress, and we need more people like her who will fight the system. Hello, Shonique. So, first off, how are you doing today?
Hi, Sebastian. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
So, you are running for District 41.
Correct.
And I think that if there was one word that I could use to describe you, it would be fierce. Of course, there's many other words such as full of passion, warrior, fighter, unapologetic. But really, I think it just boils down to fierce. But I'd
I
like to
love
hear a
that.
little bit more from you right now. And what is your background and what is your story?
So I know we're on limited time, so I can't get into all of it, but I will just tell you literally my background. I dub myself as a civil rights leader because for me that covers everything that I advocate for, right? Whether it's incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, women's rights, men's rights, children's rights, domestic violence victims' rights, criminal justice reform, transformative justice. So that's my space in which I come from. And as I have began to do policy work for the past several years, I began this space usually, I think it was about 2017. I began this space working with policy legislation surrounding all the aforementioned. I just knew that there was going to be the day and the time that I was going to run for an elected seat. I did not know what that seat was going to be. However, as we are seeing under the current administration, the current president of the United States, I definitely believe that Congress was the most effective space for my voice because in this legislative branch, we definitely need people that are going to be willing to speak up, speak out boldly. And then, as I've already told you, not stand down because at the end of the day, I do think that we have some elected officials that are willing to speak up, a little bit, not enough for me, but they back down as soon as the opposition continues to move forward strongly. And that is the difference I know between myself and some current people that are in office at this time. So I'm looking forward to this campaign. I'm looking forward to the community members of, Los Angeles, Orange County, District 41 getting to know me throughout the state of California and throughout the US, because I do know for a fact when you are an elected Congress member, you not only represent your district, but you do represent your state and you ultimately represent your nation. And I'm looking forward to making some effective changes on the federal level.
Nice. Well, I am sold and I am excited. And on that note, you also have one of the most unique stories that I've ever heard. And to follow that, when did this passion for policy making and seeing that you had to make change occur? When did you decide to really take that upon yourself to run for office?
Well, the technically my passion for civil rights movement started when I was 8 years old, when my uncle was incarcerated with 81 years to life under the three strikes law, also known as the crime bill of 1994. That led me to believing and wanting to do, criminal defense, civil rights attorneys. However, I came from a family that had not pursued higher education, so I didn't know exactly what that route was going to look like. There was a lot of different traumas and nuances that occurred in my family that led to me, being in foster care, things of that nature. So I pretty much had to figure out this path for education on my own. I had to figure out this path of, just healing from generational traumas on my own. And throughout that process, unfortunately, I found myself in a domestic violence relationship when I aged out of foster care. I'm 34, so I was born in 1991. When I aged out of foster care, I believe that was in 2009. Don't quote me on that, but I think it was 2009. We did not have some of the programs that we currently have for foster children on today. I do know on today there's a lot of great effective changes to the foster care system. However, those same systems were not available previously. So when I turned 18, there was not housing and our shelters available, readily available for me. So I aged out and I went into homelessness. And with that homelessness, unfortunately, that led to me getting in a relationship with a friend of mine that I grew up with. He was going through his own unfortunate traumas, which resulted in substance abuse and a whole bunch of other things. And unfortunately, due to his traumas, his substance abuse, the things he did not heal from, he made me his victim, right? He took his anger out on me, his substance abuse out on me. He was physically abusive towards me. And we were dating for about 5 years, and it was a very tumultuous, violent relationship. I was regularly beaten and attacked by him. Friends, family, even teachers of my college were repeatedly calling the police for me, and I was not in a space to leave. I didn't have the finances and ability to leave. I was a full-time college student. I was working full-time, and with that, that was my focus, right? I knew I wanted to leave one day. I just knew I didn't have the financial means to leave. So I was attempting to set myself up for success to leave safely, because in the few days I would try to leave him, I was sleeping in my car. And eventually I would go back home with him because we're both paying rent and staying in this home. I needed to shower, I needed to take care of myself. So I would find myself returning to that environment, even though I knew I wanted to leave. When I finally got the I want to say courage, but not really courage, right? Because I knew the whole time I was creating this plan. So when I finally actually was able to implement my plan and leave him, I was separated from him for 6 months. I had my own apartment. I was succeeding. I was doing well. A mutual friend invited me to a birthday party of hers, and him and I both attended the birthday party. I did, in fact, know he was going to be there. However, because of the months that I was separated from him, I personally didn't have a reason to be concerned that any harm was going to come my way. Unfortunately, he arrived. He was drunk, he was high, and he accused me of separating from him because of dating someone else and potentially being pregnant by this person. These accusations were not true, but in the event, even if they were, right, that was my right. And unfortunately, with that, he was very upset. He began to punch on me, began to pull my hair, all of these things. So I attempted to get in my car and leave the scene. He punched the window out of my vehicle. I'm sitting in my vehicle. He punched the window out of my vehicle as I was sitting inside of it, and literally beat me unconscious. You couldn't recognize my face at all. Both my eyes were black, white meat hanging out of my lip. He was punching from the left side of me because, of course, he was punching my driver's side window. So he was holding me by my right side of my hair. So all my long, beautiful hair on this right side was pretty much all ripped out, had glass shards all in my face, all in my neck. Again, it was a gruesome scene. It was terrible. For the first time in the time that we had dated and spent together, I called the police. That was my very first time calling the police, because I was no longer afraid, right? I didn't have to go home to him in that environment. So when I called the police and they arrived, this was Riverside County Sheriff's Department. When they arrived, they somehow said they were not able to determine the aggressor. And I'm like, how do you not? How are you not able to determine the aggressor? Mind you, I never even got to push him. I never got to protect myself. Never got to defend myself. I never even got to get in fetal position because I'm sitting in my car. And so I'm confused, very much so knew that I had a concussion. There was no doubt to my mind. Like I just was not in my right mind. So I was screaming and I was yelling at the police, like, arrest him, take him to jail. I'm frantic. I just have been beat unconscious. However, the police arrested me and they arrested him. They arrested him for misdemeanor, domestic violence, and misdemeanor violation of restraining order. I was arrested for felony assault with a deadly weapon. And the thought was, they said that upon questioning him, he stated that yes, he did beat me. However, he did it because he had a fear for his life. He believed that I was getting in my vehicle in an attempt to run him over. I never even got to put my keys in my ignition. But the fact that an abuser was able to say that, and the police were then able to say, well, we don't know, whose story is true or not. He also lied at that time on that evening and said that he had a restraining order against me, which he did not. I've never had a restraining order by any persons, right, against me. I did have a restraining order against him. However, it was known as a no negative contact restraining order. And that simply means at the time that I got it enacted, him and I were living together. So rather than him having to stay a certain amount of feet from me, he was able to be around me, right, since we were living together. However, he was not able to violate that restraining order by punching me, hitting me, kicking, yelling at me, all of those things. So it was something enacted, strangely enough, by Riverside County, because they had prosecuted him so many times for committing domestic violence acts against me. So the fact that this same county that was supposed to be protecting me and allegedly had protected me in the past, helping me get this restraining order,
It
then
was Riverside County?
this was Riverside County.
Oh,
Yes.
I've heard a
So
lot of corrupt cases from Riverside County.
Yeah, I know if I don't know how familiar with a few years ago, there was investigations into Orange County District Attorney's Office and the overzealous prosecution and the prosecutorial misconduct that happened there. I cannot wait for the day that someone opens up the cases in Riverside County because you cannot tell me there's any system, any state, any county, any district attorney's office in the state nor in United States of America that is as corrupt as Riverside County. You cannot tell me that. Like I'm willing to bet my life that it is the most corrupt system in the United States. Like that's how awful and the prosecutorial system is there. So that would have to be a whole nother podcast for us to get into the harms and the injustices that happen in that county. And so I really am looking forward to someone exposing them, one day. But for that, I'll digress. So saying that to say, when the district attorney office of Riverside County decided to pick up the case, right? We were both jailed that night. He went to jail. I went to jail again. Remember, I said he was under 2 misdemeanor counts. I was under 1 felony count. I had never been to jail before, never been to juvenile hall. I was a full-time college student. I was working as a paraprofessional health aide for Palm Springs Unified School District. I was living life great. My only previous issues was being in a relationship with an abuser. I was not a criminal or anything of that nature. The district attorney's office only picked up charges against me. They made I don't want to officially call it a deal because I do not want to misspeak. However, there was some form of a deal with him for him to testify against me, and they would not prosecute him. He was never prosecuted. He was never tried. You said why?
Yeah,
Well, for those that are
I
not
can
aware,
imagine, but that's just
though,
yeah.
for those that are not aware, the way the criminal justice system works, right? There's an abuser and there's a victim. So it will be counterproductive and it wouldn't even work for a jury to say that you can't say that he's my victim and then also say I'm his victim. It can't work that way. One person's going to be a suspect and one person's going to be a victim. I do personally believe at that time under the sheriff, Chad Blanco, I hope nobody's voting for him for
He's
governor.
running for governor,
Uh,
yeah.
I hope no one is voting for that corrupt man for governor. So at that time, under Chad Blanco, this was still under him. At that time, I personally believe there was a desire to prosecute for assault with a deadly weapon. There's a lot of nuances into the way, politics and things work behind the scenes. When someone is looking to become deputy sheriff, they need to appear to certain members of the community as they are tough on crime and tough on specific crimes. And for me personally, just based on my knowledge, my education, my lived experiences, I do believe there was a desire at that time to prosecute at the felony level for assault with a deadly weapon because it's absolutely ridiculous for me as a victim of domestic violence who had an active restraining order in place to have called the police for help. Never placed a handle on this individual previously nor that evening to find myself having to fight and prove my innocence against this person. And again, he was not denying that he beat me unconscious. He was not denying that. He was lying, however, just simply saying that, and I won't say just simply, right? But simply saying, "Oh, I feared for my life and that's why I did it." And it's like, how do you fear for your life for someone you've been beating for 5 years? Where did the fear come from? And even if you were afraid for your life, I hate to say it, but I'm going to keep it real every time. You should have been afraid for your life. You've been beating the girl for 5 years and you've been beating her unconscious multiple times. And this is the first time she's called the police. So I know, due to just conversations at a later time with members of his family, he was afraid of being prosecuted. He was afraid of the time that he was potentially going to be facing due to the violation of the restraining order and the repetitive convictions of domestic violence. So I understand that he acted out of a space of fear, correct? So I understand why he did the ignorant things that he did. However, it does not excuse the justice system, the criminal justice system, to put that power and that capability for an abuser to yet again harm their victim. So it was this all around cycle of abuse. And I'm going to go a step further and say the same passion, the same fierceness that you have heard me speak of and that I speak of all the time eloquently for myself. I know that that was a concern for Riverside Sheriff's Department, whether they want to admit it or not. After the case happened, I began to call on my behalf. I was reaching out to the district attorney's office and I was advocating for myself, like, how am I this victim of domestic violence for all these years? I have this active restraining order. Why was I arrested? So I would not shut the hell up. I was calling everyone. So I do believe, whether they want to admit it or not, that the reason charges were filed against me was to shut me up. I think there was a fear from Riverside County that I was going to sue them. And we'll get into that at a whole nother time as well, because what happens is when you, unfortunately, in a lot of these corrupt counties, when you decide that you want to advocate for yourself and, enact your right to a fair trial and, have a jury trial, you will find yourself known as what we like to call trumped up charges. And that was before Trump became president.
Ironic,
We
yeah.
like to call trumped up charges.
Yeah.
So I went from being charged with a felony assault with a deadly weapon. Once I stated I wanted to enact my rights and file the right to go for a jury trial, I was then charged with a second felony, and that was under criminal threats. My criminal threat charge was stated that the abuser could have sworn, didn't say he heard, could have sworn he heard me say, I'm going to kill you. At some point in time during my beating, during him beating me, he could have sworn he heard me say, I'm going to kill you. I didn't state this. I wasn't able to state anything as I'm being beat unconscious, right? But that's what he was able to say. And my story, as tragic as it may be for some people to hear, as shocking as it may be for some people to hear, the sad reality of it is it's not unique. It's not new. It's not the end. It's not the end all be all. I want it to be the end. I don't want anyone to go through what I experienced, but I know that comes with me getting into this elected office, right? Being able to advocate openly and out loud. So I gave you that whole backstory to say it was my experience, that very specific one that said, oh, they effed around and they're about to find out. You came for the wrong person. Not only am I going to advocate for myself and I'm going to make it out of this system, I'm going to make it out of this negative experience that's being, perpetrated upon me. I'm also now going to put, fire behind my words, and I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen to other members of the community. So I was actually prosecuted and sentenced to 2 years state prison at half, which means I had to serve 1 year in state prison. Again, I'm a young woman that hadn't been to juvenile hall, had not been to jail, had no criminal record. The year of my trial, I was completing my bachelor's degree, which I was on the dean's list. I've always been on the dean's list throughout all of my education. I was applying to law schools that year. This is in 2016 that my jury trial was happening. The case happened December of 2014. And my jury trial took place May of 2016. And I was sentenced to prison in November of 2016, and I was released in November 2017. And ever since I've been released, there has been this beast that no one can ever cage again.
I
I
think
mean,
honestly,
yeah.
what your case is not unique, but what you've made out of it is unique. The ability to wanting to help people, I think that is really what makes your story so powerful and so unique, because you've transformed it, and you're rightfully the hero of your own story. And
Yes, actually,
yeah,
yeah, not to cut you off, I apologize.
no, no.
Actually, strange enough, no, there are so many men and women
Mhm.
that are in the criminal justice reform space that use their experience to speak out for others. And I will say, some of those cases are wrongful convictions. Excuse me, so sorry. Some of those cases are individuals that did commit their crime. However, they did reform themselves, right? Because the criminal justice system does not reform you. It does not rehabilitate you. That is a lie from the pits of hell. You have to determine that for yourself, and you have to fight for yourself to become rehabilitated, no matter how many years you're sentenced to prison, county jail, juvenile hall. So so I hear you, and I agree with you to the extent that I'm not sure how many other formerly incarcerated individuals run
True.
for positions
Yeah,
such as Congress,
yeah,
but there's so many formerly incarcerated people doing amazing work throughout the state of California and throughout the country. So I do want to credit them for that.
yeah, exactly. No, 100%. And one thing that I was looking at after talking to you the other day was there is around, I think, 6 to 15% of wrongful convictions happening in America. What can America do to make this stop happening? Because it's, I think, around 300,000 people who are wrongfully convicted per year, if I'm not wrong.
Well, for one, I'm gonna say I know for a fact that that number that you just told me is not accurate because at the end of the day, so many people's voices, they don't get heard.
It's more. Yeah, that's the only ones that are being reported, of course.
Exactly. I'm going to say I know for a fact. And I know that because even while I was incarcerated, I reached out to the Innocence Project and I'm like, get me out of here, right? Like, I'm this victim of domestic violence. I didn't commit this crime. And again, I was sentenced to 1 year. So by the time I got a response back, it was probably about 7, 8 months into my sentence. I was pretty much getting ready to, get out. They thanked me for contacting them, but they let me know, however, unfortunately, due to the high volume of cases that come before their office of wrongfully convicted individuals, they have to prioritize those that are facing the death penalty. And that typically includes cases of murder, rape, things of that nature. So I had to be very understanding, as tragic as my experience was, that there's people that are fighting for their life. And if their innocence does not get proven, they unfortunately will find themselves subjected to, death. So I will say I don't know the statistics of the amount of individuals that are wrongfully
It doesn't even
incarcerated.
matter. It's just wrong at
Right.
the end of the day. Then
It's
yeah,
it's
there's
wrong.
you don't need a
So
statistic to back it up. Yeah.
exactly. So for me, what America can do and what America needs to do is America has to stop shying away from these conversations. It makes people so uncomfortable to talk about the realities of the prison industrial complex. So I know the other day I was able to brief with you. I always make it my business to correct someone when they say the criminal justice system is broken. No, it's not. It's not. Believing it's broken just means that you do not know your history. Criminal justice system derives from the 13th Amendment. And the 13th Amendment, at the end of the day, was enacted due to what was supposed to be the end of slavery, but all it did was modernize slavery. So you went from not being able to own slaves on a plantation to then being able to own slaves that, because they committed a crime, you can now jail them, imprison them, and they can now still continue to do your labor for you. And as I was telling you the other day, so many Americans are not aware of the amount of goods and produce that we get from state prisons,
You
whether
talked
we're
about
talking
Sorry to cut you off. You talked about American flags the other day, I think, if I remember correctly, being
American flags are generated and created inside of state prisons. Let's talk about freedom, right? Here you are, not free, and you're making American flags. You're making license plates. You're making clothes for major fashion designers. You're making socks and bras and underwears. You're literally enslaved, and you are creating products and produce for America. And so many Americans, I understand, they do not know that this is what's happening. As you and I both know, we've talked about, the prison industrial complex is mostly all private owned, meaning if you are a private prison owner, and that is your bread and your butter. That is what makes you and your family the great millionaires you are today, able to hoard your wealth. How do you keep that millions of dollars coming into you and your family's lives? Oh, you have to imprison people, because if your prisons are empty, you're not making money. So when people in America are asking, well, why would someone that's innocent, be sentenced to prison, and why can't they just prove their innocence? It's intentionally designed to be complicated to release
100%.
yourself from prison when you're
Yeah.
innocent, because you're a body, you're a number, you are a paycheck. You're a paycheck, So that would be an interesting study to see how many people we think are great and effective leaders, how many people we think are great and effective fashion designer owners, or whatever the case their title may be, and they are part of that prison industrial complex. They're owners. They have stocks in that. That would be something amazing that I'm curious to see. I know a few names behind the scenes that I've heard about, but I haven't done my homework, because otherwise I would definitely state them. But I haven't done my homework to know the truth and the
This
validity. But
point we can just infer because it's just a reality. But my next question for you is, I don't think that people often realize, would you say that both sides of the political parties benefit from such systems?
absolutely, I am a Democrat through and through. True blue wave. However, what the difference is, someone such as myself, I'm a progressive Democrat, and I do believe that there is a difference in a progressive Democrat, centralist, and a moderate. More often than not, if you are a true progressive out there, you should be speaking out about criminal justice reform, the prison, industrial complex, all of those things. However, I would be very surprised and very amiss to hear a centralist talking about it or a moderate speaking about it, because at the end of the day, there's certain injustices and systems that they do not openly speak about, whether it be because they are benefiting from it financially themselves, or because they do not want to rub someone the wrong way that they have partnership and relationship with. I do think a lot of times we look to a lot of harms that happen to Americans at the fault of Republicans. And by we, I'm stating Democrats. A lot of Democrats look to the harm that happens to America at the hands of others, such as Republicans, right? But that's not always the case. Sometimes it's your very own party, so even though I'm a Democrat through and through, and I always vote blue down my ballot, I also know that there are Democrats in office that harm. As I've spoken to you, that harm may not be them actively participating in the system and pouring into the system in any capacity. However, their silence is just as deadly. So if you're in an elected position and you have not openly spoke up, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with that because it's those injustices of civil rights for the Black community, the brown community, that led to someone such as the current president and his administration believing that it's absolutely acceptable for them to bring ICE into communities. And I'm now speaking to family members, community members, that they're afraid to take their kids to school. They're afraid to go to work. They're afraid to just drive around not knowing, am I going to make it back home to my family? It was all these injustices, all these systems, and they're all connected. They're all connected. These ICE detention centers, privately owned, like they're all connected, and people
Yeah,
are very
yeah.
confused. So yeah, we have to get this conversation out there. But this isn't something that's silent. Those of us that work in policy, work in legislation, elected positions, candidates, we're aware of this conversation. However, some people get away with the fact that a lot of community members, a lot of constituents, they're not aware of this. They don't
The
know
issue
those
the issue
things.
is also the lack of accountability for our own party. It's easy to criticize another party when somebody is doing something wrong, but if you want to be a good party, you also need to have some certain standards. And
Exactly.
yeah, and I guess for my next question, I would say, do you believe in rehabilitation?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
obviously.
mean,
So obviously, to
absolutely.
follow this,
Yes.
for rehabilitation to be successful, society obviously has to follow along with it. I would say a main issue in America is we often treat so-called minorities as criminals before they even do a crime. Um, how can we even change the functions of society? And I think it's part of my larger frustrations because it has to do with the economy and our current outlook. But I guess my question is, what can you do about it?
Well, I'm actually going to take it a step further and say, as a minority, specifically speaking for Black community members, we are dubbed criminals while we're in our mother's womb.
Yeah,
Talk about it. We're criminals in our mother's womb. Our mothers don't even have the same safety and protections as non-Black individuals throughout pregnancy, right? The maternal death rates for Black women. There's so many things that we could address, right? And so when you think of that, the fact that from birth, as someone that is a community member of color, from birth you are stereotyped. You are thought to be this super predator, right? We're thinking of language from the 1994 crime bill. You were thought to be a monster, a super predator, this criminal based off of the color of your skin that you didn't even dictate and determine was going to, be a part of your life. Then you go forward and you look at things such as rehabilitation. As you said, society will sit here and say, I'm going to sentence this person to X amount of years, X amount of months because they committed this crime. And once they, serve this sentence, it's like you have this gloom and this thing over your head for the rest of your life. I know I touched with you the other day upon coming home, even someone such as myself that was wrongfully convicted came home and I was struggling, even though I had my bachelor's degree, I was struggling to find stable, safe, affordable housing because landlords were not willing to rent to me due to me having a felony on my record. I was deemed this criminal, right? But wait, I served my sentence. I actually had good behavior. I never, I was not in trouble while I was incarcerated. I was supposed to do 3 years on state parole. However, I was released after 1 year due to this stellar, person that I was, parolee. I was not a criminal to begin with, but I absolutely, never demonstrated that. So society, however, decided, yes, you are. You don't get to have safe, affordable housing anymore. You're going to be denied that. You don't get to apply for jobs anymore that the next person can apply for because you have this felony on your record. So I participated in what was known in the state of California as ban the box, and that allowed for people that had a criminal record to no longer have to check a box on their job application stating that they in fact had been convicted of a criminal offense prior to getting offered a job. So they do still have to disclose it, say they get offered a job and there is a background check. You do at that time have to legally disclose that you have a criminal background record. However, hopefully the company has allowed you the ability to show your capabilities as a potential employee, and they like the work that you have demonstrated to them. And if they have concerns regarding your criminal background, at that time they allow you to go through an appeal process, just basically explaining, this was what my offense was about, this is how I have rehabilitated myself, and this is how I can be an asset to your company. So it allows yourself to be humanized. I still think that that is very much so an unnecessary step, but I'll take what we can get, right? Because I don't have to prove to you that I have been rehabilitated. The fact that I served my sentence, aren't I rehabilitated? That was the whole
And
reason
there
that
should
you
be more
incarcerated.
programs meant for rehabilitation, and our prison system should be more. It shouldn't be up to the individual.
It should not. It should not be
Yeah,
up to the individual. It should not be up to the employer, because it still brings about prejudice. It still brings about prejudice to
and
those that
power, and
are formerly.
power over yeah, power.
Yeah. Yeah, and someone can simply say, "Oh, that her story sounds great and this and that. I get it, but even though she was wrongfully convicted, she still was in prison, and I don't want that in my company. I don't want that in my business." No one's going to tell me that directly, but there is still that bias that's there. So just bringing it full circle, in order for America to truly allow rehabilitation to happen, we have to remove these barriers. We can't sentence to someone to however many months, however many years, and then expect them to come home and live a safe, healthy, productive life, to be a productive member of society. And we have barriers in place keeping them from accessing safe and stable housing, keeping them from accessing secure and stable jobs, and then wonder why there are so many people that then turn around and step into a space where they're recidivism again. It's like you don't want that to happen. And so I got to do great work with organizations such as Anti-Recidivism Coalition, ARC, based out of Los Angeles, and that is one of the main things they work on, is allowing for employers to give those that are formerly incarcerated a chance. They fight for living wages, not just minimum wage, but living wages for those that are formerly incarcerated. So many Californians had no idea that men and women incarcerated in state prisons go and fight those wildfires that we experience here in California every single year. These individuals go fight, and previous to some of the new laws that have taken place, these individuals were making about I think it was like $1 an hour. I don't want to misquote, but the point was they were making pennies. They were making pennies, but they were going out fighting the same wildfires as Cal Fire. Major respect and support to Cal Fire. This was not something they were doing. They were not determining the rate of pay of these individuals. However, Cal Fire is aware, just like those of us in this space are aware, a lot of those incarcerated individuals, formerly incarcerated individuals, they were going into the fires first. They were putting their lives on the line first, and they were not being compensated properly. And ultimately, when you're going and fighting a fire, your life is on the line. That smoke inhalation is serious. The risk of your life is serious. And to know that there was so many men and women that were incarcerated, that were being subjected to this, right? Because for some, it's not even a choice. For some, that is their job assignment. You're assigned jobs in prison. Some jobs you sign up for, some you're assigned. And if you do not participate in whatever job you're assigned, you can be denied your parole. You can be, meaning that you stay in prison longer. You can be denied a reduction to your prison sentence. So ultimately, again, remember I talked about modernized slavery, because it's not a choice of yours. The
Yeah,
state makes a choice
one,
that this is
yeah,
what you're going to do for us. This is the job you're going to do for us, and you're going to do it, or we're going to keep you here longer. You're going to do it, or we're going to deny your parole.
yeah,
Involuntary
yeah.
servitude.
Yeah, I mean,
Involuntary servitude.
it's almost at this point, it's government corporatized slavery. Um,
Yes.
and you talked about this, and I just want to sum it up. Like, how can you expect somebody to behave as a human when their humanity is suspended, and you won't even give them the decency to be a human? And
Absolutely.
yeah, and now I want to kind of segue into another conversation,
Okay.
because one thing that I hear a lot, and I dislike this, is when I hear people say, "Oh, if we just get Trump out of office, we're going to go back to normal." What does normal look like for America? Normal
Yeah.
for who?
I
Normal
love
for,
remember when
yeah,
you I
Um,
love when you asked me that the other day.
yeah,
Going to try my best to be mindful of the curse words I want to use at this time. I am a Black woman.
use as
There's no
many as you
such
want, please.
there's no such thing as a effing normal America. Like I told you the other day, America's never been great. It's never been great for me. It's never been great for the Black community. I'm going to be bold enough to say I don't believe, because again, I'm only an ally, so I can only speak to my experience in the relationships and the partnerships I've had with non-Black community members. I do not believe America has ever been great for Hispanics. I do not believe America has ever been great for Asians. I do not believe America has ever been great for anyone outside of white Americans. I mean, like there might be some little conversations of like before they came and white Americans came and stole the natives' land. Maybe they do think America was great at that point. I'm not really sure, but point
I
is,
mean, we know we yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
right? It might have been great for them. I really don't know, right? But what I do know is for the majority of us, anyone that is non-white, I hate the conversation about make America great again. I wouldn't care if Trump was saying it or someone else was saying it. America was not ever great. So you can't make it great again.
And
Remember,
my point that I was going to say is when he says make America great, he means America great in the 1950s when it was heavily segregated. That's
right. Because
that's yeah.
yes, as I told you the other day, when we're talking about making America great again, it's like, now what exactly do you consider great?
For
Do
who?
you mean it was great when we were having to escort young children to schools such as Ruby Bridges because white Americans were standing outside of her school spitting on her, calling her the strong ER, when she just wanted a fair education? She just wanted a fair education, and she was being denied that right and that capability due to the color of her skin. Was America great when Black Americans had to drink from a different water fountain than white Americans? Was America great when Black Americans could not use the same restroom as white Americans? Was America great when Black Americans were being raped and brutally beaten and impregnated with their slave masters' children? Please tell me when America was great. And if you can tell me when America was great for Black Americans, then we can start talking about making it great again. But because I know it was never great for my community, because I know it was never great for the communities that I am an ally with, such as Hispanic communities, Asian communities, LGBTQ communities, because I know it was never great for them, we can have conversations about making it great and safe for the first time ever. But in order to do that, you're going to need to elect officials such as myself that are going to be honest about the fact that it was never great, that are going to be bold about the fact that it was never great, and are going to be unapologetically radical, right, about making it great for the first time. And I told you, I love being called a radical. I own that shit. I love it because at the end of the day, radical simply means it's like, how dare you speak to the inhumane society that we live in and then fight for the oppressed? That's all a radical is. A radical is in my opinion, a radical is someone that's just standing up boldly saying, I'm not taking this sitting down.
I'll take
You're
your
not going
opinion as a
to.
fact, honestly, because I love your definition. And no, you're 100% like even within the Democrat, like the fact that I've talked to I spoke some to some people who were very close to me, and they keep insisting on this, just like, oh, getting Trump out of office, normalcy, and then la di da di da, we can go back to normal, and it's just like, come on, open your eyes. It's
Yeah,
honestly
I'll take it a
disgusting. Yeah.
step further. Once we get Trump out of office, what are we going to do with all of the people within the Republican and the Democratic Party that didn't do a goddamn thing while he was in office, creating all this harm, creating all this violence, creating all this hatred in the country, when he was creating all this division? Because when you sit there silent, I don't care what side of the aisle you sit on, you could be a Democrat or a Republican. When you sit there silent, you might as well have stood right there with them and said you agree.
Like the
You should.
Democrats for healthcare. The Democrats for healthcare who didn't. We're gonna need to have, honestly, our own version of the Nuremberg trials. That's what I'm gonna say.
I mean, there are so many things we can touch on that the administration is doing at this time, and Democrats and Republicans are sitting by just cute and mute. I told you one of the things that I love saying when I'm speaking to people, I talk about these goddamn Democrats that are really Republicans cosplaying Democrats. Let's talk about it. You're not a Democrat. You're a Republican cosplaying a Democrat, because if you were a true Democrat, what my definition that my grandmother taught me as young as 8, 9 years old, when I learned about the Democratic and the Republican Party when I was in elementary school, I came home. She's like, hey, what did you learn in school today, babe? So I'm telling her, like, oh, I learned this and this and that about the Republicans. I learned this and this and that about the Democrats. And I said, Grandma, what are we? She said, "We Democrats, baby." And she went into this spiel and she told me what the Democratic Party was about, what the Democratic Party represented. At that time, my grandma was born in the 1960s. She's deceased now, but she was born in the 1960s. So she literally was right there, at the height of segregation. And she was just unapologetically Black, right? And so to know what the injustices look like for her, and to know that it wasn't a far separate cry, when she's speaking to her grandchild, and I'm asking, which political party are we and why, and she let me know what the Democratic Party stood for and what it represented. I know she spoke from a place of that was her true belief, that was her true understanding, is that the Democratic Party is for me, it's for us, it's for Black people, it's for all people, it's for equality, it's for justice, it's for speaking up for community members. That's what the Democratic Party is about. And if that's not what you're about, you need to stop calling yourself a Democrat. Like, I personally don't appreciate it, and I take offense to it, because you can't say that you're a Democrat and you're not willing to stand up for injustices happening to LGBTQ members. You can't say you're a Democrat and you didn't stand up and fight when Roe versus Wade was turned over to protect women's reproductive rights. You cannot say that you're a Democrat and you want to, sit down silently when there's hate happening to Asians, when there's hate happening to Palestinians or anyone. It does not matter who hate is happening to. As a Democrat, you speak up and you stand out for it. You can redivert all of your attention and your focus to America. Trust me, I understand. There's so many Americans saying, well, I don't want to talk about Israel, and I don't want to talk about,
But you can't call yourself a good nation if you're only going to be good for your own country. It has to be for the entire world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, look, I get it. I get it, right? When you try to feed your own children and you're trying to, survive in an expensive state like California, an expensive nation like America, I do get it. You do not want your millions, billions, and trillions of dollars being shipped overseas. Look, I'm right there with you. Trust me, I'm right there with you. But we do not have to be inhumane to the harm and the violence that's happening in these other
For
countries.
example,
Those are different.
one thing that I saw this week is Israel has universal health care. America does not. Our party did not vote for our ability to help with healthcare, which is crazy.
Well, there's also so many countries that have low crime rates, and America does not. But
Yeah. So the fact
so
that
we
we're
can talk
taking
about
like
all of
another
that.
side that has created a genocide, but the fact that it's so complex.
It's
We could
so
go about
complex.
imperialism all day and all that.
Yeah.
But really, I guess for now, for my question is, you
Mhm.
had a beautiful definition. Sorry, you had a beautiful definition of being progressive or being radical. What does, I guess, to hardboil that definition, what does it mean for you to be progressive?
I am. There's no box, right? There's no box. The reason I say there's no box is because you should always be coming up with something new and innovative and radical, and when you're on the far left side, such as myself, like because as you're out here talking to community members, I do believe if you're an effective leader, you're always your brain should always be churning up new ideas and new creative ways. For me, to be progressive, to be radical, you're listening to your community members, you're listening to constituents, you're weighing, the harms that are, being perpetrated in certain counties, certain districts, and you're thinking of creative ways, new ways to reduce those harms, reduce those barriers, eliminate those barriers, eradicate them, abolish them. All these fun, beautiful words that the a lot of people do not like to talk about. You're thinking of ways to defund the police. I was going there. You're thinking of ways to defund the police. And what you're saying is like, I'm not saying that I do not care about public safety. I'm not saying all officers are bad. There are some amazing men and women on police force, within sheriff departments and all of those things, who really get behind the badge because they genuinely do believe in the ability to protect and serve. And they do genuinely want to make their community safe. I absolutely am aware of that. I'm not ignorant to that.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of corruption. Yeah.
At the very same time, I'm gonna capitalize my however. I do know that there can be a defunding of the police department and rediversion of these programs, allocation of programs that focus on substance abuse, focus on domestic violence victims, focus on domestic violence abusers, focus on traumas. Right? I don't have a piece of hatred in my body towards my former abuser. Him and I do not speak often. I do speak to him at different times in life. He still sometimes struggles with substance abuse and mental health and things of that nature. But due to my own healing and due to my own knowledge and understanding of substance abuse, of alcoholism, of mental health issues, I see there is a bigger picture. As I told you the other day, he too was a victim. He too was a victim. He came from the poverty and the issues that he did. He didn't have the help and the resources that he needed. And instead of fighting to heal, he found himself a victim instead. And so I say that to say, if there had been systems in place when I, as a victim, did not know what it looked like, right? I'm 18, 19 years old and my boyfriend's beating me. And I'm like, oh my God, but I love him. And he went through XYZ growing up. That happens a lot for so many victims. And somebody that is a victim of domestic violence or someone that works with victims of domestic violence is well aware that you can't force someone to leave before they're ready. And a lot of times, they do genuinely believe that that they can save their abuser, right? Stockholm syndrome. They do genuinely believe they can save their abuser. They do genuinely believe their abuser when they say, hey, I'm not ever going to do that to you again. If there had been systems in place, if there had been programs in place for someone such as himself, for someone such as me, readily available. So even when I was not the one calling the police, all these other community members were calling the police on my behalf. If the police would have said, you know what, Miss Williams, I understand you're not ready to leave your abuser. However, I need you to start attending these domestic violence, trainings. I need you to start learning about the cycle of abuse. I need you to, and mandate it for me. Go ahead and mandate it for me, because I was not aware initially that I was a victim. I was not aware that I was a victim. I believe that I was in love with someone that was going through difficulties and struggles. And when he got high or when he got drunk, he didn't know how to take, where to take that anger and frustration out. So I always believed him when he said it wasn't going to happen again, because initially there would be a night of abuse and then he wouldn't abuse me again for like 3-4 months. So I was genuinely believing that the change was happening, right? That's unfortunately what a lot of domestic violence victims believe. And then on his side, as the abuser, it's like, hey, not only are we going to prosecute you and place you on probation, right? Because that's what initially was happening for him. We're going to mandate you attend these domestic violence, programs. Unfortunately, while he was mandated after so many convictions of needing to attend domestic violence abuser programs, these programs cost. And I don't remember what the fee was, but it was like $100-something per class. And he was having to take these classes for 52 weeks. Well, this is no excuse to him. This was the reality,
It
because
was
of course
cost out of his own pocket.
it was out of his own pocket.
Yeah.
So this was no excuse for him. It's the reality, because I knew, he was on fixed income because he had, again, mental health issues, right? So he was on Social Security disability due to his mental health. And with that, he was not able to pay the rent and, his portion of the rent, his portion of the bills, and pay the programs. These programs, if you do not pay your fee, you can't attend the class. As soon as you miss one class, you are kicked out of the program. You have to go back to the courts. You have to be reinstated. You pay a new reinstatement fee, and your 52 weeks start all over. So at points in time when he was actively willing to participate in the program, he could not afford the program. So I'm not advocating for domestic violence abusers. However, I am also very much so aware of the difficulties of the system, and when someone is willing to get help and seek that help and participate in their training programs, however, they simply cannot afford them. And I've heard this story true and through, as I've worked with many community members that themselves have also been sentenced to anger management classes, substance abuse treatment programs. A lot of these programs cost, and community members cannot afford them. Well, if we take money from the police department, right? If we defund the police department and we put this money into these systems, there's no longer an excuse for the abuser. I won't say an excuse for the victim, because that sounds wrong, right?
But
But
yeah,
there's
now
this.
you're sorry to cut you up, but just to sum it
Mhm.
up, yeah, now you're not fixing the symptom, you're not just patching it up, but you're fixing the actual cause. Sorry, I
Yeah,
just wanted to sum it up because that is an
absolutely.
amazing point that you're talking about. It's really just fixing the cause before it ever happens and investing and making those programs available for people.
Right. And then you'll hear people say, well, if we have less police on the street, more crime is going to happen. Do your research. No, when communities feel safe, when there are community-based programs, Community members feel safer. They participate in mental health services, substance abuse services, rehabilitation programs. There's a lot of great communities that are thriving on today because there's funding coming into their community-based programs. I was sharing with you the other day when someone is experiencing a mental health crisis and they have already been in partnership with a community-based organization, they are more likely to respond well when that community-based program arrives to that mental health crisis versus a police officer. I'm gonna take it a step further. Remember, I don't mind being called a radical.
Go
The
for it.
fact the fact that police officers are not required to have a bachelor's degree to be a police officer. However, in order to be a social worker, you have to have a bachelor's degree. And in order to be a licensed social worker, you have to have a master's degree and you have to undergo oh so many hours of trained programming under another licensed social worker. Well, let's talk about it. As a police officer, you are the first line of defense for people undergoing mental health crisis, domestic violence disputes, psychological breakdowns, whatever that may look like. How are you not required to have a bachelor's degree? How are you not required to understand social work or psychology makeup of an individual? You go through a post training. I understand that to, learn how to respond combatively, whatever the case may be. I don't know. I've never went through the post training program, but what I do know is you're not, in my strong opinion, you are not in a position as a police officer to adequately respond and show up to community members in the middle of crisis.
To
You're
take it
not.
up and just say that it's a fact what you're saying, yeah, point blank, you are not just with a high school diploma, and you shouldn't be even expected to. Um,
No.
it's yeah.
And I'm going to speak to it because it happened a few years. I'm sorry, not a few years. Well, technically a few years ago here in the state of California. It was up north. There was an officer that responded to some kind of police, dispute. He responded with a suspect. Him and his partner, if I recall correctly, they apprehended the suspect. There was some drugs on the suspect. The officer took the substance from the suspect, went back to the police station, and he took those drugs. The officer himself, injected himself with those drugs. He was found unconscious in the bathroom at the police station, overdosed, right? So he was fired. Ultimately, there was an investigation. He was fired. His police department fired him. Well, unfortunately, a few weeks ago, that very same officer murdered his 11-year-old son. That is an officer that underwent some kind of post training and some kind of whatever and was placed on the streets. I don't recall how long he was on the streets, but the fact that you originally took drugs from a suspect, right? You took these drugs, then you partook in those same drugs yourself. When he was investigated, he stated that unfortunately, he had came from areas of trauma himself, and basically he found himself just wanting to try this drug, whatever. He spoke to whatever mental health issues he was going through at the time. But that was very interesting to learn, is that this police officer, here he was hiding behind his badge, experiencing mental health issues himself. Here he was hiding behind his badge, experiencing substance abuse himself, but he was in charge of going out into the community and was supposed to be protecting and serving. And he was participating in the same acts that he was placing people in county jail and state prison for. Same acts. And that same officer turned around and committed one of the most heinous acts that anyone can think of by taking the life of his own child, a minor. I don't care how old the child was, but the fact that this was a defenseless minor. Again, this was in the state of California, just took place a few weeks ago. The system failed that child. The system failed whomever came in contact with that police officer over the course of however long he was on the police force. Because I'm going to take it a step further and say, in my very strong belief, had he been a Black police officer and he would have committed that act of
It would have
taking
gone
those,
differently.
it would have gone differently. It would have gone differently. And that is my issue. He was fired. He was fired. I don't believe there was a prosecution. If there was, he was not imprisoned. And at the same time, I advocate for, defunding the police and closing down, jails and prisons. I also advocate for, but if we're going to talk about it, and if you do believe in this rehabilitation system and you do believe in the criminal justice system, well, then arrest your own. Arrest your own. When they're harming the communities, when we have police officers and jail staffers killing people behind these prison walls, killing people behind these jail walls and lying, saying that they're committing suicide to keep their families from being able to sue the police department, arrest your own because it's happening.
It is. And not enough people talk about it. And those who, it makes people uncomfortable, but also
And
it
people
makes them
do talk
benefit from
about it,
it.
but we're silenced. People talk about it,
Exactly.
but we're silenced. People talk about it, but the news cameras don't come out. People talk, I'm connected with all these grassroots spaces. There's rallies and protests happening all the time behind men and women, young boys and girls that are being killed in juvenile halls, in jails, in prisons. You can go on Google right now. You can see organizations, whether it's anti-police terror project, whether it's Second Call with Skip, whether it's anti-recidivism coalition, whether it's Sister Warriors. I can go down the list of names. I can give you some names if you want to go partner with some of these organizations that do some of this great work and stand up very boldly advocating for these community members. But guess what? Most of these organizations, they themselves are founded by formerly incarcerated individuals. They're ran and led by formerly incarcerated individuals, and we're kept out of these spaces. Political leaders do not want us on camera. They do not want us speaking to the constituents of California, the constituents of America, because now it's being exposed, the harms and the realities of what's happening. Because there's this ignorant belief, if we just throw these people in jail, our streets are safer. No, they're not. Because the real criminal, the real gang members are some of your elected officials, are some of your police officers, are some of your district attorney's officers. I'm sorry, some of your district attorney leaders, some of your judges, some of your, chief of police, some of these people that are running for governor. Again, you guys better not be voting for Chad
Yeah.
Blanco. I would be very, very greatly
Um,
upset.
yeah. No, that's wow. Yeah. It's crazy how complex the system is and how it really is like an entire infrastructure.
It's a
Um,
gang. It's a
yeah.
gang. We talk about gangs, and people are afraid of Bloods and Crips and all these other gangs, right? People, a lot of people have heard of MS-13. You think MS-13 is scary? Learn about the political gangs. Learn about the law enforcement gangs. Learn about the district attorney gangs. Learn about the judge gang. You think gangs are scary. You have no idea what the real gangs are. Those are the ones that are scary. And again, I'm not saying do not incarcerate someone that has committed a crime, because right now we do not have another system in place to bring about justice for victims of violence, right? We do not have other systems in place to address the harms
Yeah.
of someone that commits a crime. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is the current system in place, it does not effectively rehabilitate. It does not effectively bring about criminal justice reform. Because it doesn't even get to the root. You just imprison people.
Yeah.
You're charging them with a crime. You're imprisoning
Nobody should
them.
be
You're
making
getting
money off of
involuntary.
it.
Yeah, you're getting
Yeah.
involuntary servitude, but you're not actually rehabilitating. And then when they come home, you're setting them up for failure to return
And that's
right back to the
purposeful, as you were
system.
saying earlier.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in my strong opinion, you want them to return to prison because again, it gets
One,
to
yeah.
fuel the prison industrial complex, which is privately owned. America doesn't truly want rehabilitation, because true rehabilitation now means that you've lost out on that great amount of funding that you receive from the prison industrial complex. So you don't want it. You can lie to Americans and say you want it. You can lie to Americans and gaslight them, because you gaslight Americans by thinking we have to have more police on the streets. We have to have ICE detention centers. We have to have more sheriff. You gaslight Americans to believe that that is what we need in order to be safe. But statistics prove community-based programs is what brings safety, whether we're talking mental health, whether we're talking homelessness, whether we're talking about criminal justice reform. Community-based programs is what brings safety. They effectively work.
They do. Yeah. Now I do want to touch on another segment because it's been 57 minutes around.
Okay.
What would you say is the main focus of your campaign? What are the main issues to you that you want to change the most?
So clearly, one of the main
Clearly,
issues
incarceration.
is
Yes.
criminal justice reform. Criminal justice reform is one of my top
Hmm.
priorities. Outside of that, affordable housing, and not the blanket affordable housing. I mean, true affordable housing. Some of the issues that I will be addressing is the currently in the state of California, there's different rates of what rent is capped at. I do want there to be a uniform cap rate of 5% throughout the state of California. On top of that, I do want there to be laws enacted that you cannot increase rent in a 24-month period. Meaning, currently, many landlords they increase the rent repetitively every 12 months. That is not allowing Americans, Californians, the opportunity to adjust to the new increased rate. Right? I believe I was speaking with you the other day, stating that a lot of families, when they get their rent increases, it is somewhere between about $150 to $250 per month minimum, and that's a soft number. And so, if you have to do that every 12 months, you're not allowing yourself, you're not being able to sustain. So changing that to every 24 months, then that radical part jumps in, right? Because you thought that was radical, but no. Now, on top of that, mandating employers that they have to give annual increases to employees, because it's not making sense that when you move into an apartment complex, when you move into a house, you are required to show proof of 2 to 2.5 times, in some places even 3 times the rent. That's what you're mandated to show in order to show that you can afford to live there. However, once your rent increase goes up, they don't take into consideration, look, I already showed you what I earned. So if you know I only earn X amount of dollars per month, where the hell am I supposed to get this money to pay this rent when you increase the rent by $250? How's my family getting that? And then we question why there is such a high rate of homelessness in the state of California. So mandating employers, I have not yet determined what I do believe to be a fair amount of employees that employer must, employ. But once employers have a certain amount of employees, mandating that they are required to give mandated raises. We will be making sure, by we meaning whoever is, part of this piece of legislation with me, we will be making sure that there is a protection in place for the constituents, because I know there's going to be concerns for people of like, well, what if the employer tries to fire me previous to that annual raise that I'm due? Oh no, I think of everything. I already know what it's like when people try to, skate their way around implementing laws. So there will be protections in place for that, because you can't tell me someone has worked for your company for 2 years, for 5 years, for 10 years, and you haven't given them a damn raise. Clearly, you think that that is a good and effective employee, because otherwise you wouldn't have them here. So you're not going to be able to just throw them out now that this law has been enacted in place. And so I do know that we are an at-will state. However, that does not mean that you can simply throw someone out. So we are going to be looking into ways that this will be a protection for employers. I'm sorry, for employees. So we do not want them, having fears and concerns surrounding that. Outside of those are like my key top 3 priorities. Very big on Roe versus Wade. I cannot wait to get in Congress. We need to reenact Roe versus Wade. We need that, reenacted back into law. There's just so many things that need to be undone. So
It's
many
crazy how
harms.
you can say like your top 3 priorities, but like we all know like
Yes.
it's at this point it's a long list.
It's a long list. So those are just, I just want to go towards those things: criminal justice reform, and making our state, my District 41, my state of California, but my country of America, making it truly sustainable for all, not for the wealthy, not for the certain classes, not for certain socioeconomic, as you can, see, probably tell from my platform. I came from disadvantaged communities. I was raised on welfare previous to becoming a foster child. I have to fight my way through. I was, on food stamps as an adult, all of those things. I benefited from Obamacare. I benefited from the Biden administration with student loan debt relief. So you better believe I'm coming for student loan debt relief, because I still got some monies back there that I need forgiven, in order to feel safe and in order to thrive in this country. I don't want to survive. I don't believe in people just surviving. Survival mode will have people making poor choices.
I
I'm a
love
true
that. I love
believer.
that.
Yes, when people are in survival mode, they will make poor choices, because if it comes down to you or me and I'm out here trying to, we've seen that show
Yeah,
Survivor.
yeah.
People will
We
do
know.
some crazy things, right? People will do some crazy things when they're trying to survive. So getting people outside of survivorship. I even tell people, even with you all today, hearing about my, domestic violence experience, do not call me a domestic violence survivor. No, I experienced domestic violence, but I'm not a domestic violence survivor, because in my mind, that means I would still be in a place of a victim. I'm not a victim. I'm not a survivor. I unfortunately experienced domestic violence. However, I now advocate and fight for domestic violence victims and domestic violence survivors to thrive. So I'm someone that has learned to thrive in spite of domestic violence, in spite of of false imprisonment, in spite of coming from the systematic oppression that I have gone through. So, of course, once elected in office, I want to remove any and every barrier that I can for individuals such as myself, the working, class, anyone and everyone that is experiencing systematic oppression. I want to remove those barriers. I want to have those real conversations, get these community members in spaces and in places where they too can make effective changes. If we can have a president in office that has been convicted of, what was it, 34 felonies?
34, I think. Yeah.
34, and he got to skate past imprisonment. You can't tell me someone such as myself that was wrongfully convicted of 2 felonies can't be in office. You can't tell me someone else that did commit whatever crime they committed can't be truly reformed. You can't tell me that. You can't tell me that there isn't a such thing as real rehabilitation, because the president of the United States, he didn't even have to prove he was rehabilitated, because guess what? He's not. He's
At
still
this
creating
point,
harm
it's
right
only
now today.
rehabilitation for the elites. Like, let's take a look at Ghislaine Maxwell, who's
But they're not
yeah.
rehabilitated.
No,
Trump is just
exactly,
pardoning his
exactly. It's
people.
when I say it's yeah,
He released
quotation
these
marks.
people that stormed the White House. Like, how the hell did you get to storm the White House? But listen, hold on, because I'm going to say this. I don't know how much more time we have. I told somebody else the other day, I said, listen, when they stormed that White House, that was absolutely insane. They violated however many laws, did whatever they did. But guess what? I'm going to give it to you. I wish the Democrats would have stormed the White House when
Should have.
Trump sat here and he sent ICE raids out into the community. They should have fucking stormed the White House. Oh, you want to play? You want to make our communities feel unsafe? We're going to make this White House feel unsafe for you.
For Roe v. Wade, even before that, yeah.
Our communities can't feel safe going to school. Our communities can't feel safe going to work. You and your goddamn ballroom aren't going to feel safe. We're about to storm this mother F. Like, that for me is like, that's my far left thinking. That's my radical thinking. Like, what's up? Let's go storm this White House.
I wouldn't even call that radical. It's the
White
only
House.
thing that makes sense. Like, it's not. There's nothing radical about what you're saying. It just
I
makes
know
sense.
it's not.
Yeah,
I know it's not radical, right? But
yeah.
people think
And
it's
sadly,
radical.
people are
So
labeling it at that. Yeah.
even when I speak up to my own party, as I'm out, advocating, campaigning for my candidacy, I let it be known Trump is loud and wrong. His administration is loud and wrong. But guess what? They don't back down. They're loud and they're wrong, and they stand on their shit. The Democratic Party, they're cute and they're mute. And I'm sick of it. There is not a reason that we should have had a government shutdown for a month and a half, had Americans scared of if they were going to receive their SNAP benefits, their health care, whatever the case may be. And then you walked away from the goddamn table and didn't get them anything. You didn't get us anything. What were you doing? And I said, as I told you the other day, see, this is why you need to put millennials in office. And this is why you need to put Gen Zs in office. And this is why you need to put progressive in office. And this
People
is why
who have actually
they can be
lived
boomers.
through oppression, actually.
Yeah,
It doesn't make
they
sense
can
to
be
have, yeah.
boomers. Yeah, I'm not age discriminating. You could be a boomer and remain in office if you're willing to get up and fight, though. You have to be willing to get up and fight. If you're a boomer or beyond and you're not willing to get up and fight, move out the way. Because trust me, the millennials, the Gen Z, we're sick of it. We're sick of the shit. We're willing to get up and fight. Baby, we would have had tents. We would have had tents sleeping outside that White House. We would have had sleeping bags sleeping right there in the office. We would not have walked away from that table with nothing. Those boomers that sat there and knew they were facing retirement, what was it, 5 of them? They knew they were facing retirement. So they had nothing to lose by folding. Their families are fine. They're walking away with retirement packages. It's unacceptable. And that was my own party. That was Democrats. I don't respect them, because what were you doing? You can't say you're a Democrat and you do not stand up for all. You can't say you're a Democrat and you're not standing up for affordable health care. You're not standing up for affordable economic wages. You're not standing up for people that are in need of SNAP benefits. Yeah. You want to overturn Roe versus Wade. You want to get all in people's private areas and worry about what child they do or do not conceive. That's your business. So you think, right? Well, then who's going to feed those babies? Who's going to feed those babies? I tell people in my personal life all the time, the way you see me here, this is the same way I am in my personal life. I do have healthy conversations with, the women in my life when they, have found themselves in places where they're considering abortion. And I let them know, listen, whether you decide to, go through with this pregnancy, I will support you. Whether you decide to terminate this pregnancy, I will support you, because the choice is yours. That's not my business. Yeah. Even as a family member or friend, it's not my business. So how dare a state, how dare a country make it their business? And I'll go a step further and say, if I'm not in a space or a place to help you take care of that child financially, economically, mentally, emotionally, It's none of my goddamn business. It's none of my business. So it's like I've had we don't have the time on this platform today to speak about it. It's not our business. But America, you will sit here and overturn something such as Roe versus Wade, and then you will not give these families the money that they need to feed these children. And it's not just about finances when it comes down to the decision of why someone decides to,
Yeah,
go
no,
through with the
100%.
termination of
Yeah,
pregnancy, right?
it's
But
complex.
we
Yeah,
do know that as one of the factors.
yeah.
There are people that are conscientious on today, right? Because we have rights that we didn't have years ago. And there's people that are conscientious on today and say, you know what? I do not want to bring my child into financial oppression. I do not want to bring a child into the America we have on. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And they don't have to explain to you, me, anybody why they don't want to. It's none of our goddamn business. That's their life. That's their choice, whatever that looks like. So again, as an elected official, there's just so many things that we
Yeah.
have to address within the Democratic Party. I could go on and on forever. I would love to be invited back another time as the campaign is going through and through for us to talk about some other issues. I know you're going to get a lot of feedback from community members about topics they want to hear us discuss in this place, and I'm all for it. I'm going to be making myself available to, you, of course, Sebastian, for you to reach out to me, give me some questions that community members have. I'll do my best to do like some YouTube shorts or some Instagram reels and stuff like that, addressing some of the concerns of community members. I look forward to it, but also am going ahead and letting you know, invite me back at any time, not just throughout my campaign, but at any time. I would love for us to continue to have these healthy conversations of what it looks like to hold our country accountable, to hold the Democratic Party accountable, to hold Trump and his administration accountable. But definitely, I want to have more conversations of what it looks like to get me elected into office, and voices such as myself that are going to speak out openly and boldly, progressively, radically, unapologetically.
Yeah, well, I love exactly everything that you're saying. I am 100% behind it, and I'd love to have you back on the show. I'm going to start wrapping this up, and yeah, let's be honest. A lot of these conversations are ugly, and you're right. A lot of people do talk about it, but not enough of the people who have the power actually do talk about it, and that's why I'm actually so invested in your campaign. When I saw your website, I was just like, this is exactly what we need.
Yes.
What, by the way, is your website, and how can people support you? Do you have an Instagram, and how can people know more about you?
Yes. So my website is shoniqueforcongress.com. So that's SHONIQUEFORCONGRESS.com. If there's a link option, I'm pretty sure you'll be sharing
I'll
that out.
post it in the video.
Perfect. Thank you. And so when you actually go onto my website, there is actually a link for every single one of my social media platforms. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. Blue Sky, I think you name it, and I'm there.
You're
You're
everywhere.
also going to get to see that lovely narrative video that's on YouTube, in which Sebastian spoke about earlier. One of the main and most effective ways to support my campaign at this time is going to be through donations. Unfortunately, politics is politics, right? So as avidly as I speak up for my community, I'm not going to be able to get into Congress without donations. I'm going to need donations in order to continue to run a very strong campaign, in order to get mailers out, in order to, hire staff, in order to get my platform widespread, right? So I'm so thankful for spaces such as yours, Sebastian, podcasts that are bringing me on board, letting my voice be heard, letting community members learn of me. However, some people, are not familiar with podcast space, so I need to canvas and I need to go door to door, in order to see them. In my community, there's probably a little bit more than 40,000 doors, and so I can't knock on all those doors by myself. I am going to need to hire staff to do that. I'm going to need to get some volunteers on board to assist with that. So along that option to donate on my website, again, no dollar amount is too small. I think it allows you to donate as little as $5. You can donate up to 3,500 for my primary. That would be the max. And again, I do believe the smallest amount is $5. If it lets you do $1, give me $1. I'm going to take your $1 far. I know how to hustle, so don't worry about it. Outside of donating, you please share out my platform. Please share out my social media links. Also, there is an option to sign up for volunteers. We are going to need volunteers, like I said, helping knock on those doors, canvassing. If you yourself have a podcast platform, or a strong platform, influencing on whatever, TikTok, Instagram, invite me out. We are all trying to help each other win in this space as far as progressive. So I am so thankful again for you, Sebastian, and your community, your fan base that will be following out and sharing and supporting me throughout this campaign. I'm going to need it. I'm
Yeah,
going to
well,
need
they
your
better,
support.
they better. And I can safely say on my end, for me, it's not an if you get elected, it's a when you
Yes,
get elected.
clock
Because
that.
you
Clock that.
exactly. No, no, no. You have exactly what it takes. You have the spirit, the energy, and exactly what's been a lack within the Democratic Party. And you're a fighter. You're a fighter, and you're exactly what we need. And I'm looking forward to it. Well, thank you
Yes,
very much for letting me interview you. You had a lot to
yes.
say, and thank you so much. It's going to be
Thank
amazing
you.
following your
You have
campaign.
no idea. It's such a pleasure. Thank you. I look forward to coming back.
Hello, this is Sebastian, and if you liked this video, be sure to like and follow. You liking this video and following is going to make sure that I can keep making videos like this. And if you like history, politics, and are just downright worried about our modern day political landscape, be sure to follow along because the journey has just started.